Welcome to my podcast. My name is Mikko Kempe, and in this episode, as my guest, Finnish researcher and analysist Kalevi Korento. And right away I have to say that this video does contain what's considered dangerous information, especially by the standards of YouTube. And therefore the link to the actual episode you will find below that will take you to a video platform called TokenTube, or TokenTube here in Finnish. It's a Finnish-based video platform that claims to be more on the side of free speech, especially what comes to certain topics. And therefore, when you go to TokenTube, make sure to subscribe to my channel there. Of course, do subscribe here in YouTube as well if you're first time and haven't subscribed yet. But the reason is that actually we don't know how long YouTube will allow this type of even introductory videos to certain topics, or let's say perhaps links to certain videos or platforms. And since we don't know that, I would highly recommend to join and subscribe also on TokenTube. And more of my videos, especially my English speaking videos, will be also available there as well. And this idea of censorship is interesting one, because I think what many people don't consider is that the censorship itself, of course, contains certain risks. So if you haven't considered this question, I would highly suggest that we all would consider and think the implications that this type of censorship on certain topics may have. What I mean, I think a good example is that YouTube, for example, at some point censored and removed any videos questioning the origins of this, let's say, submicroscopic infectious agent, and simply censored all the conversation that experts were having, analysts were having, perhaps scientists were having, all not allowed. But yet in later, with new information, it was found that maybe this was not the best idea, and therefore now, as far as I understand, it is allowed. The question, I mean, at least about the origins of this agent I mentioned before. So what's the danger? Well, the danger is, of course, that with censorship, who is determining what can be censored and what cannot? And is there a possibility that perhaps accidentally, or perhaps in some cases even intentionally, we could accidentally censor the truth? And by not allowing certain discussions to happen, it would actually harm us. So I think this is a question that many don't necessarily consider. And another point I want to make is that oftentimes the rationale is that we need to get rid of so-called misinformation because it's dangerous. But in fact, I would argue that perhaps in many cases, the idea that if we censor, let's say, experts, scientists, analysts, doctors, to let's say what comes to this topic, actually the opposite happens, which is more and more people become more doubtful of why this type of conversations cannot be had openly and transparently, and therefore perhaps even become ultimately to start spreading, let's say, all types of misinformation perhaps. And so what is my point? My point is that I think ultimately the better route to take is to actually have an open debate, open conversation, open transparent discussion about topics that might be considered dangerous or maybe difficult or may even contain the risk of misinformation. I mean, some could call that also scientific way of thinking, in a way that we could have an open debate among scientists about what may be the case about this situation. And I just personally believe that even from a perspective of everybody feeling more comfortable about, let's say, the official information, I think the better route to take is to have open debates about these discussions. Having said that, if you look at this episode, which I of course recommend, you will find that Kalevi will make many claims that many would most likely consider even outrageous. But I would say the better route to take, even in this case, is to openly debate and openly show them and disprove them. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, even if you are a scientist, researcher, expert, analyst in this field especially, you are always welcome to come to Kempe Podcast and point out your perspective and point of view to these issues. And at the same time, I think this would be much easier route for the official perspective to gain more credibility and for gain more, let's say, trust in the eyes of many people who might have some doubts. I don't know. What would you think? Would you agree with this or not? I don't know. This would be an interesting topic in and of itself. And I invite you to comment. Do come. If you like this video, put thumbs up. I invite you to comment on this video. This information can be shared if you think this type of debate would be important to openly hold. Even some of the claims that Kalevi is making, not going so in detail of the claims, even perhaps you yourself could be a part of, verifying. And let's say from the perspective that now in Finland, for example, we have the belief that a 12-year-old, for example, is mature enough to take personal responsibility of certain health choices. Let's say what comes to this topic that this episode was made. And we assume that 12-year-olds are mature enough to take responsibility of decisions that might have also perhaps even long-term consequences. I would think that it would be reasonable to think that as adults especially, at least, we could have an open debate about different ideas and maybe come together to examine them carefully and to maybe contribute to the advancement of correct, good information in an open, transparent way that I think would ultimately lead to the best possible scenario for everyone. And this is basically has been the intention of my podcast from the beginning, that we could have an open discussion about different topics, even if they are difficult or even if they be considered dangerous. And this is one of the reasons I often also invite many guests who have varied perspectives of many different topics regarding many different subjects. And I think, and I personally think, it even sort of as an exercise to examine my own beliefs and where my own beliefs are based on. And what I mean by that is that if somebody is giving me contradictory information, rather than just go, I don't want to hear it, I approach it from a perspective that, okay, let me use the contradictory information to examine more carefully and deeply my own beliefs. Because I believe that if we have thought through our own beliefs and the logical kind of pathways that we have come to believe a certain way about different subjects, then I think even contradictory information simply can point out either that, okay, maybe we are in some way somewhere wrong about our own beliefs, or much more likely, which I think it can be only a good thing, that, okay, I have really thought through this and this contradictory information, having considered it, I think in this case or certain cases simply verify what I already believe to be true, even much more stronger, and therefore having an open debate about a certain subject only verified the information and helped perhaps to point out even to the other person where they might be wrong about certain beliefs. So like I said, therefore I think personally that having an open discussion, even if it means that it's difficult, even could be painful. I'm now thinking about, if I think back to my education, which is in marriage and family therapy, if I think from a perspective that if a couple comes and they have challenges or problems or they cannot communicate, usually underlying deep issue, it comes down to not having some kind of difficult conversation. And by one party trying to silence or dismiss or criticize another person's perspective, you can probably think that in that scenario, most likely won't lead perhaps exactly to the outcome you maybe wish it would. So what my point is that oftentimes, even if you look at it from a perspective of personal relationships, we are maybe scared, or we don't know how, or we find it painful, or we find it maybe easier not to have a certain type of difficult, challenging, perhaps even painful conversation. But ultimately, okay, in the short term, it might feel like you have certain relief or everything might seem okay, but ultimately it won't necessarily lead to a deeper feeling of love and trust. And if we are looking for trust, let's say, trust in the official information authorities, if we wish that from everybody, I think from that perspective, it's important to have these difficult conversations and to have these transparent, open conversations, to really examine the claims of different people, even if they contradict your own beliefs and ideas and perhaps information. So with that said, sort of a long introduction to this episode. So this episode is in Finnish but has English subtitles. I welcome you to the episode. The link is below. So I see you on TokenTube or TokenTube with Kalevi Korento. Thank you very much for joining my podcast. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. If you liked the episode, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Do join our conversations and comment and share these videos forward. Thank you once again and see you on the next episode.